Right. Right. Today, what are we doing today? Fairly light day today. I got to thinking about the way I'm setting up the development environment, and okay, this all started with setting up development environments so that um, everyone sings from the same hymn sheet. In other words, when I'm teaching, I can have a standard lab environment. So, in consideration of how to do that, I went with VirtualBox as the basic virtualization, and then everyone would set up a virtual machine. Because once you're inside that virtual machine, it's a standard environment. I don't have to worry about whether people are coming from Windows or from Mac and so on. So I can then set everything up in a controlled environment, and it's easy then for me to supply people with instructions on how to update that environment depending on where they've dipped into the tutorial or the book. Similarly, it's easy for someone to be able to take a snapshot, do some experimentation and go back to the snapshot, or with VMs. This is the kind of stuff that's not really very easy with, like using a Docker container. So in this particular context, virtual machines are definitely a better idea. The downside is the initial setup. Now I've tried to keep, as much of the set. Well, I've kept all of the setup really in Vagrant. So again, that's a constant across all three of the main environments. So yeah, Mac OS has got Vagrant, Windows has got Vagrant, and Linux has got Vagrant. So everyone hopefully will have the same experience. And I've kept all of the scripts and everything inside of the guest VM so that, again, I don't have to write 3 different versions of everything. So what are we doing today is looking at my own development environment, in the development environment for the development environment, if you like. So what I'm trying to do is standardize on using certain setup for everything. So for example, I'm going to use a project called commitizen to standardize commit messages and the way versions are bumped and the way the changelog is maintained in the Git repositories. And to that end, I'm also adding into the mix a pre-commit, which is a set of hook scripts. Pre-commit is kind of a hook script management system. And so I'm adding into that configuration some standard stuff that is going to be okay across any of the projects I work on. So I've added that into the mix. Now, from my point of view, because I'm developing on a Mac, my development environment is set up. The development environment for the development environment is set up obviously specifically for the Mac. Inside the virtual machine, though, it will be set up to be generic and for Linux. So, but it will be basically the same idea. There'll be pre-commit hooks set up. There'll be within whatever repository is relevant to the project for users. There will be the CI/CD will take advantage of the fact that we know that the pre-commit's being used and enforced. We'll also have the fact that commitizen will be effectively mandated, so that everything can be kept in check. The other thing I'm going to use is cookie cutter. Cookie cutter is good because, again, standardization. It standardizes and makes it very quick and easy for people to set up a standard set of files, standard environment. And there are already templates for a lot of things I want to work on immediately. So for example, we started working on the Gitia formula. Now, there are Git formulas already, but I want to write one from scratch because it's a useful exercise. So I can go through the process of doing it the wrong way, then doing it the right way. It's a good introduction to thinking about the way things should be. Actually, yeah, I'm going to go off on a tangent in a second. Stop fidgeting, otherwise you'll go down. I know it's not comfortable without a blanket, but you'll have to put up with it. Yeah, anyway, so that's what I've been doing today, is messing around with that stuff and getting that set up and ready, so that so that I can start being a little bit more controlled. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start setting up the test infra stuff, so that I can write unit tests for the systems I'm setting up, which means then once I've got to the point of setting up in the home lab, setting up the CI/CD pipeline for these things, every time I make a change to it, it will go through an automated series of tests to make sure I'm not breaking anything. And then I'm going to start looking at treating the books I'm writing as, if you like, requirements for the test. So, for example, if a lesson calls for a certain series of operations, I can write corresponding tests to test those operations. And what I want to try and do is tie those into the documentation in such a way that effectively, well, it all gets tied together. Because the documentation is effectively documentation as code, because it's all LaTeX based, or LaTeX. I can never decide whether LaTeX or LaTeX is better. Anyway, yeah. No, sorry, these are all just things I'm tinkering with at the moment. The other thing I wanted to say, and this is the tangent I was going to go off on, is as is my want, I've been looking at Reddit. I shouldn't really, because it always irritates me one way or another. But there's a lot of good stuff on there as well, and lots of interesting people asking interesting questions. The one that got me today, what was it? Okay, there are two things. First of all, I've noticed this propensity for people to say, "Oh, you should be following best practices and modularizing your, for example, Terraform." And I mean, they're not wrong. What I find really amazing is that people have to have this pointed out to them. It's one of my core concepts. I document it repeatedly. Core concepts: cohesion, coupling, separation of concerns. All of these things drive you to write, very good modularized systems. And that includes your things like your Terraform. It also drives you to decouple things like configuration from implementation. So, it's a code smell. If you end up with any kind of fixed string anywhere in your system, whether it be code or whether it be buried in some some Terraform or whatever, you should start thinking, is this really a fixed string, or should this be pulled in from an external database, or should it be provided by an environment variable? Can I make this more flexible? Similarly, you've got to think about things like transclusions and things like that. Again, can you parameterize them to make them more flexible? Anyway, that was one thing. The other thing was people on the Docker forum were once again, having a go at someone for wanting to put multiple services in a single Docker. Now, again, they're not wrong saying, if they say things like, well, best practice is to put one service in each Docker container. Actually, we should just say one container because it's not a Docker, it's a container. And I mean, that's, yes, best practice says that is the case. But then people go too far because they say, they lay down the law. They say, thou shalt not put more than one. A couple of people said, thou shalt not put more than one processor container. Well, that's just fucking wrong because containers regularly run multiple processes. That's not the issue. Multiple services, though, yes. It is certainly true that as a rule, you should aim to have one service per Docker per container. And this comes back again to things like separation of concerns. The whole point is, that by having one service per container, you've got a natural separation of concerns between your containers, which will again minimize things like requiring unintended updates to a container. That said, it's sometimes desirable to run multiple services in a single container. And I mean, the obvious case in point is, I'll say obvious case in point, a case in point is if I want to have automated testing of a virtual machine, the easiest way to do that is to have it all built into a single container with the virtualization and everything contained within that, and then run my tests in from outside the virtual machine. Why would I, jump through hoops and contort myself and create a really complicated system when that's the natural way to do it? So, you're in conflict with the keep it simple. Was it KISS? Keep it simple, stupid, or keep it stupidly simple, depending on how offensive you want to be. You're in conflict with that when you start saying things like thou must always have one service per container. You'll always be worried about people when they say you must always. It's like grammar Nazis. You just say you must never split an infinitive. It's bullshit. Of course you can split infinitives. It's just people get in their head. They get these rules in their head, and because they don't understand. I actually saw one bloke say, "Oh, the reason this bloke is trying to put multiple services because he doesn't understand containerization." To which I say, "You don't understand containerization, okay?" You're talking about containerization as if it's some special thing, and it's not. It's C groups managed well in a nice interface. Okay, there's a few other bits and pieces as well. There's nothing intrinsically special about a container. It's just another way of doing things, and once you appreciate that the best practice is just that, it's a best practice. It is not. It's not a prescription. Then you start to say, okay, what is the best way of solving my problem? And if that is to have multiple services within a single container, I say go for it. Why not? The problem is, I think, that when you say that to someone, they then get lazy. And they think, oh, well, if multiple services in one container is okay, then I'll just, take the easy way. I'll shove everything into one container. And that, I guess, is what people are trying to prevent. If I'm going to be generous, I'm going to assume that's what people are trying to prevent. And they're saying, look, we don't want people over applying this idea. So again, if you understand the technology, there's nothing fundamentally, there's nothing technical. There's no technical reason for not putting multiple services in a single container. But you should only do so when it is the best solution to your particular problem. You shouldn't do it just because it's the easy way of doing it. Conversely, you shouldn't do the opposite. You shouldn't tie yourself up in knots to create a multiple container set of services to solve a problem that is best solved by sticking them all in one. So, yeah. Similarly, you shouldn't contort yourself to construct a containerized solution when a virtual machine would be easier, or use a virtual machine when a container would be easier. Again, it's a question of understanding the problem. It's a bit like many years ago, I had this debate with someone about, which computer language was best. And the answer, of course, is the one which fits the problem. There are some languages which are specifically designed to solve or to be easy to solve a particular set of problems. And that's the reason why the language was written. Perl, for all its god-awful syntax, was really developed to solve a particular problem. Lots of text manipulation. Okay, so it's really good at pattern matching. In fact, you will see throughout your career, you'll see things like PCRE. Okay, it's the Perl regular expressions. Okay, Perl basically set the standard for regular expressions because that's what it did really well. It's no longer fashionable. Python has replaced it, and I have to say Python is a much better language in general. It's easier to read, and a language which is easier to read is easier to maintain. Okay, Python is a vast improvement over Perl for most things. And again, this I had this original conversation back in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was about C. And every man and his dog learned C. And C it's a great language, but it's a systems programming language. Really, it's not I wouldn't say it was a general purpose programming language, even though people treated it as such. I mean, any Turing complete language is a general purpose language by the broadest possible definition. But in terms of the kind of problems that the problems that are easy to solve in a particular language are different. And that can be for a whole load of reasons. One could be that the language is specifically syntax designed for solving that particular problem. Another reason is the availability of libraries and so on, and frameworks. God help us. But, frameworks are another bugbear. People tend to use frameworks just because they're there, not because they're necessarily the best solution. And again, you get this Lotus Notes problem. You get the problem that people will use framework X because they're familiar with framework X, which is not a bad reason for using it, but it's not necessarily a good reason for using it either. There could be a better framework for solving a particular problem. And then, of course, you've got the argument about, if you've got a Ruby development house, then obviously Ruby is going to be the direction in which you're going to go for everything else. So if you are principally developing Ruby applications, then Puppet is a better solution than SaltStack for your configuration management, because Puppet is Ruby based, SaltStack is Python based. Conversely, if you're a Python centric development environment, then you're going to tend towards SaltStack because it's all Python underneath, and you'll move away from things like Ruby. So, yeah. I mean, that said, you've also got a lot of cross-compatibility stuff. So, anyway, Once again, I've started to witter off, and I've completely wandered away from what I was working on. So tomorrow, I'm going to finish off. I'm going to write a couple of little scripts that just help set up. Well, I'm going to extend the configuration that I've started already, and I'm going to write a couple of little scripts just to help me with automation in my development environment, and then look at look at the project environment I set up inside, so that I can make sure it's ready for when I do the Gittier stuff, which I may start tomorrow if I have a reasonable night's sleep. Right, and on that note, I'm going to call it a day. 20 minutes. Blimey, it's amazing how long you can witter on for.